Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to Our Ladies Row, Federica, and all the co-organizers for having me. I'm very excited to talk about Quarto Dashboards today. Just a really brief introduction. My name is Isabella Velasquez. I work at Posit on the developer relations team. Since I do work at Posit, I cannot give this presentation without mentioning PositConf is happening next month in August, and we actually have a workshop on Quarto Dashboards presented by Mina Chikaya Rundell. This presentation will be, very fundamental and high level. If you want to really explore your skills in Quarto Dashboards, I recommend signing up. And in any case, there are going to be lots of talks and presentations on Quarto, which is this amazing new tool for creating all sorts of dynamic dashboards and documents and books and presentations. And so would love to see you there. And I did want to mention too, at the bottom of this presentation is a link to the presentation if you want to follow along. At the top of the link, there also is a GitHub button in case you want to see the source code or anything like that. And with that, let's get started. I want to begin with a very quick introduction to Quarto. So I'm going to give Carlos Scheidegger's definition, which is a slightly abbreviated definition from the one that's on the website, where Quarto is an open source technical content creation system. And with Quarto, you can use your favorite editors, such as RStudio or VS Code or the newly released Positron, to create dynamic documents with Python or R or Julia or Observable. Quarto takes rendered plain text like our Markdown files or mixed formats like Jupyter Notebooks to create high quality articles, reports, presentations, websites, blogs, and as you'll see today, dashboards, and you can put them out in formats like HTML, PDF, Word, and more. And with that, then you can publish your content to share with the world. And if you haven't used Quarto before, you may be wondering why this might be a good tool to explore. So Quarto was built from the start to support multiple computational systems and ecosystems. So you can use Quarto with absolutely no programming language or with a programming language. It's built to natively handle either one. One thing that we're going to explore later today is that Quarto has shared expression for core features. So if you are familiar with R Markdown, for example, you may have had to switch between different ways of doing the same thing depending on which package you're using. Compare that to Quarto, you have one shared core syntax, and it's the same across all formats. So something like a tab set, if you do it in a presentation, it's going to be the same as if you do it in a dashboard or you do it in a document. And another thing is that Quarto has a universal theming system that's based on what's called SAS for all HTML output. So this is really nice because it allows us to create consistent and organized theming across content. So again, whether you're making a website or a presentation or a dashboard, use the same sorts of variables to create your themes. Another thing that Quarto does, it enables single source publishing. So oftentimes we find ourselves needing to create different kinds of content, like something that's quick version, something that's web version, and you could do all of that from a single source with Quarto. And in terms of how Quarto works, they usually, this is a Quarto document. It usually starts with this YAML header, yet another Markdown language header, demarcated by these 3 dashes on either end. And the syntax of YAML are key value pairs in the format, key, colon, value. It controls the output of your document and also adds metadata like title or author, things like that. For actually writing text, this is Markdown, which is a lightweight markup language for creating formatted text. So this is what Quarto uses for syntax. And then you could put computational code chunks, and they are identified by these 3 backticks, and then the language that you want to use in curly brackets. You can have optional code chunks identified by this hash pipe, which is pound sign and then a long line. And then you put that at the beginning of your code chunk for defining which options you want to use. And then when you render oh, I'm sorry, and then this is the actual code that will be computed once you run the document. And when you render it, you create this output, in this case, an HTML page. In terms of what you can build with Quarto, you can make flexible websites, or you could create books that can be rendered to Word or EPUB. You create blogs with listings and posts and RSS feeds. Quarto has a deep feature set for presentations with Reveal.js, such as this presentation that you're looking at right now. You can publish to journals. And then, of course, what we're going to talk about today, dashboards. So that was a very, very quick introduction to Quarto, and I just wanted to note there are lots of resources out there if you are new to Quarto, have never used Quarto before, and things like that. A little while back, I gave an intro to Quarto presentation for Our Lady's St. Louis. Federico just mentioned that there was a recent webinar on creating a website with Quarto. And Emil Pitfeld actually does a lot of presentations on branding Quarto and making it your presentations or your documents look exactly how you want them to look. And so I highly recommend looking up Emil's tutorials and slides in order to learn more. And with that, we can get started on actual Quarto dashboards. So Quarto dashboards are a new output format. They allow you to publish a group of related data visualizations or text or tables as a dashboard. And it's fairly new. It is available starting in Quarto 1.4, which is only a few months old. In case you want to know what version of Quarto you're on, you can run this command in your terminal, and then it will output the version that you're on. So this is really important. Please make sure that you're using version 1.4 or later if you want to create a Quarto dashboard. And Quarto dashboards are, its goal is to make it easy to create interactive dashboards in Python or R, duly then observable. These dashboards can be deployed as static web pages, or you can integrate a backend Shiny server for enhanced interactivity. And linked down below is a gallery of various different dashboards created by my awesome colleagues. If you want to take a look and explore, in addition to actually showing the dashboard, the source code is linked to each one so you can see exactly how they were created. So some dashboard basics. Dashboards are composed of cards, and these cards are containers for plots, data display, and freeform content. Then you design your dashboard with flexible and easy to specify row and column-based layouts. And then you add sidebars and toolbars to present inputs within interactive dashboards. And you can also add pages and toolbars to further divide the content within a row or a column. To begin, let's start from scratch. This is a Quarto document. And then the document options in this YAML header define the title for the navigation bar. So again, we use these key value pairs for YAML, title, colon, and the title. And then we also specify the format as a dashboard. So these computational code chunks become the cards that live within rows or columns. And rendering that, this is what we get. So we can see our title up above, and then completely filling up our dashboard is this plot of empty cars, because that is the only card that we've specified so far. So we can add another computational code chunk, and this will automatically split into two cards. So now, same dashboard, but now we have two different plots laid on top of each other like so. And we can continue adding more information. So for example, cards can have an optional title, which we specify using the title option within the code chunk. Rendering that looks very similar, but the top, each plot has their title. So this is pretty good. We have the beginning of the dashboard, but as you notice, there's a ton of space on the sides. So maybe not the most intuitive layout. So we might want to arrange our content in other ways. I saw there was a bit in the chat. Any questions so far? Okay, great. So within a page, dashboard components are laid out using alternating sets of rows and columns, like I mentioned before, but the default dashboard page will have them laid out first by row and then by column. So without any kind of specification, this is what this dashboard would look like. But we can also be explicit about the orientation by adding this to our YAML header. And then we define orientation rows. But in this case, because we were using the default before and the default is rows, this dashboard doesn't change. However, we can change this by specifying orientation columns in the options. And now, instead of being laid out by rows first, it is laid out by columns. Alternatively, we can use headings to arrange cards. So rows and columns can also be defined by these headings, which are denoted by the pound sign. So these are level 2 markdown headings, and they define the contents of the row. So here we're putting the 2 code chunks in their own row. And when we render it, it'll actually look the same as if we did orientation columns. So it's saying 1 row with the 2 things, and so they will be side by side. Here, let's add another row. So this does not have a computational code chunk. It's just text. Here's my dashboard. And so this text will be in its own row, and then the other row will have the 2 other code chunks. And when we render it, we see it here. Okay, so let's add 1 more code chunk to the second row. So if we were to render it, this is what it looks like. The first row with the text, the second row with the 3 plots. We can also have alternating sets of rows and columns. So here we have 2 rows, 1 row with the text and the other row with the plots. But specifically in that second row, we have a column with the first 2 plots and then another column with the 3rd plot. So rendering that, we get something that looks like this. And as you can imagine, you can continue customizing your dashboard to look exactly how you would like, depending on how you lay out the different rows and columns. I will note, for me personally, this is the part of dashboard creation that takes the longest, just figuring out exactly how I want it to look and lay out, and the width and the height of the things that I want to show, so that it properly displays the data as much as possible. And so I note this in the GitHub repo. I started a templates folder where I have created a few Quarto dashboard templates that I hope for me help me remember how exactly I create commonly used dashboard layouts, and I hope that they're helpful to you as well. So we want to continue customizing how we lay out our content, and we actually have other options than just rows and columns. So we can also use tab sets to put content in different tabs. And so that allows us to include multiple views of our data with secondary importance. If one plot is more important than the other plot, you can have that one first. But then it doesn't crowd out the main display if you do have a ton of things that you want to show. And so these tab sets are created by adding the tab set class to a row or a column. So in this example, this layout has the first 2 plots as a set of 2 tabs. And when we render it, this is what it looks like. So that first row the column card, instead of having two separate plots on top of each other, now they are in separate tabs. And you can toggle back and forth between the different plots, you know, or I guess your user could, depending on what they want to look at. Another option is that we can create pages. So we can use a level 1 heading to create new pages for our different content. And we put them above the level 2 headings to define, you know, which rows and columns go in which page. And so the text of those level 1 headings are going to be used to actually create the link in the navigation bar. So rendering this, now we have 2 pages. The first page contains the first 2 code chunks. And because they're not in a tab set, they're going to be in the same column like so. And then the second page that we can toggle back and forth depending on what we want to look at. If you take a look at the gallery examples on the Quarto website, a lot of them like to use that second page for data. So like if you have sources that you want to cite or anything like that, you can add it to your second page. And then navigation. So all your dashboards are going to have that top level navigation bar. And so in our example earlier, we had our title. We can also include a logo and provide it in an image, depending on what we want it to be. We can also add these navigation buttons. So in this case, we add a navigation button for Reddit. There are some that are already predefined. So for example, this Reddit link is going to link to reddit.com with the little Reddit icon. Or we can be like more specific in what we want to link to. So in this example, this GitLab icon is going to link to my specific GitLab page. So this is what it looks like. In case it is a bit tough to see, at the top right, we have these 2 icons. And yeah, if you were to click on them, it would take you to the respective websites. And link down below, and I guess just to like mention across everything that I'm talking about, if you have questions, if you need more details, I highly recommend looking at the Quarto Docs webpage. It is very, very thorough. They do a great job. Like, for example, in this case, for navigation, they link all the options that you could put in your YAML header for the navigation bar so that you can customize it, you know, accordingly to what it is that you need. And so this is just one example, but there's a lot of other things that can be done. Just really quickly, just checking in, any questions? Okay. If not, so we've talked a bit about the dashboard basics. We have talked about the different kind of layout options, but what exactly are we going to show within the data, the layout itself? So as mentioned before, dashboards are compositions of cards, and these are cards used to present data in some way, and then they're laid out in rows and columns with these navigation options. And the most common things that you would show within these cards are text, plots, tables, or values. So for text, we can have a card with just some arbitrary markdown text. So for example, up top, it will show this text just within a card. You can also have cards where the text is rendered in the same card as some sort of code. So for example, in the second example, we have a card. The plot of empty cards is going to show up, and then within the same card above is my plot is also going to show. So you have a couple of different options. And you may have noticed earlier in our example, if we have text at the very top of a dashboard, it's going to show as text in a card when you render the dashboard, even if it's not explicitly in a card. So that is one exception. However, you can be explicit about it using the options before it, if you so choose. So plots are probably the most common content type displayed in a dashboard. And with Quarto dashboards, you can have JavaScript-based plots like leaflets or plotly. And then you can also have standard raster plots, such as ggplot2. Either one are supported. Something that you may notice as you create your Quarto dashboards is getting the correct size of the plots for the layout that they're going to be viewed in. As we saw earlier, when we just rendered the plot, it took up just some space in the middle and there was a ton of space on the sides. And so if you are familiar with knitr, which is what R Markdown uses to create documents, you can use its code chunk options in order to specify the fig width and the fig height. And so by configuring that, you can enable the plots to fit their layout container as closely as possible. So it takes a little bit of trial and error, but you are able to customize it that way. JavaScript plots tend to be a little bit better at handling resizes to fill their container than static plots. But JavaScript plots, as you can imagine, they may take a little longer to load. They enable interactivity, which is great, but it's really about, the pros and cons depending on what it is that you want to present to your audience. Another thing you can do is create tables. So create a tabular output. And so you can do simple tabular displays, tables made from Markdown or HTML, or you can use interactive table widgets that allow you to filter and sort your table. So if you've ever used package DT, for example, it allows you to create tables that filter different columns and things like that. So in this example, we're creating a GT table. And one thing to note is for this to work, I actually needed to download Quarto 1.5 if you want to use GT specifically. That's just one thing to note. But if you do have Quarto 1.5 or you really want to use GT, you can put GT tables within your Quarto dashboard and they will display like so. Okay. Another option for displaying data that I mentioned are these value boxes. And so these are really great ways of displaying very simple values within a dashboard. You can create value boxes using just plain Markdown, like this first example. Or you can, and usually you would put some kind of inline expression. In this case, I'm saying last updated, and then put today's date. That's pulled from R, using those inline expressions, which it is rendering with 2 brackets. It should just be the letter R. Sorry about that. Or you could put values in a list object that is printed by the cell. And so this list object can have these bootstrap icons. There are over 2,000 available icons that you can choose from. If you look up bootstrap icons, you can search through the whole kind of library. You can also specify the color that you want for that particular value box. It can be any CSS color, but there are also some aliases that you can use that depending on your theme. If you've ever seen like color equals primary or danger or something like that, those are those kind of like color aliases. And we'll talk about interactivity in a little bit, but in a Quarto dashboard with Shiny components, you can actually have value boxes that update dynamically based on the state of the application. So in this case, we are calculating N, with code. And so if you have it in a list where that value is being continuously updated, you can actually have the icon or the color of that value box update based on that value. And in terms of what this looks like when rendered, here are 2 value boxes, and note that they were put within the same row. So there's 2 rows in this dashboard. The first row has the 2 value boxes. The second row has the plot. And that first value box is the one that's created using the Markdown. And that second value box is the one created using the list. And here's a close up. Take a look. All right. So what if we want to select between different values or add inputs to our dashboard? We can further customize that layout that we've talked about with rows and columns in other ways. So sidebars are collapsible vertical panels for inputs. Toolbars are horizontal panels for inputs. And card inputs provide a panel for specific inputs for different cards. And so in the interest of time, I selected just to talk about sidebars today. But once again, take a look at the Quarto documentation. It does a fantastic job of talking about all three of these. And in addition, we'll just look at one example today, but there are different ways of, formatting your sidebar if you want it to show up across pages or not, and things like that. So sidebars are panes to the side that the group like inputs for your dashboards. If you've ever seen something like select a variable or, choose your value or things like that. And so if you want to include a sidebar in a Quarto dashboard, you add the sidebar class to a level 2 heading. So notice that anything below is going to be included in that sidebar. And another thing I wanted to note is we are going to have to configure the layout of the dashboard slightly. We have a level 2 heading specifying a column, and then a level 3 heading specifying a row with our value boxes, the same value boxes as we saw before. So this is because when we add our sidebar, the layout changes slightly. So we have to kind of think about constructing the dashboard differently than if we didn't have that input layout option. So I would say definitely it takes a bit of playing around, and that's why I mentioned it earlier. It just happens to be the part of Quarto dashboard creation that takes me the longest. Remembering oh, if I want to put a sidebar, what other things need to change to the main display and things like that. And also, as mentioned earlier, if there's specific things like you want an inline sidebar for a code chunk, you can do those sorts of things too. But in this case, when we render it, what it looks very similar to our previous dashboard, but now we have a sidebar here to the left. And we usually have a sidebar because we want to add some sort of interactivity for the dashboard. You're usually putting these inputs because you want your user to select between different things. So if you have never heard of Shiny, Shiny is a package that makes it easy to build web applications with R. And Quarto actually allows you to include embedded Shiny components. So if you want a plot that are changes depending on the inputs selected by the user, you can actually add interactivity. And this is a question that comes up a lot, I think. A lot of folks, they're like, should I use Quarto or should I use Shiny? And the answer is that it is not mutually exclusive. Adding interactivity to a dashboard allows you to explore concepts and data more deeply. And because Shiny is just to paraphrase Christoph here, Shiny is a package for building web applications and reactivity. And then Quarto is about layout and organization of cards on a page. And so you can actually use them together if you so choose. I would say it's kind of a bit of a spectrum in terms of which one is the right tool for you. And it really depends on your audience and how they will use your dashboard and your own time and resources. And of course, the actual objectives of your dashboard. So say you just want a really quick visual display of a lot of plots, it might make sense to just create a static Quarto dashboard. Say you want to create some plots with information and maybe a few simple filters, right? And so then in that case, a Quarto dashboard with some Shiny components might be a better suited option. And say you have a dashboard with a lot of interactivity and a lot of functionality. and it will handle a lot of data, and you have time and the resources to create it, then in that case, a full Shiny dashboard might be your best bet as opposed to trying to create a Quarto dashboard with Shiny components. Another thing we'll talk about later is deployment. So where will you put your dashboard? A static dashboard is an HTML page and therefore can be published to anywhere HTML can be published. But a Shiny dashboard requires a server. So I think another important question to ask yourself when you're deciding between the spectrum is, do I have a place with a server that I can deploy a Shiny dashboard to? And also a Quarto dashboard with Shiny components. And if the answer is no, maybe a static HTML page is what you need. So let's begin with a non-interactive dashboard, so very similar to the one that we've created so far. Notice that we have a sidebar. And when we render it, this is what it looks like. And we have a plot down here that shows the miles per gallon variable. So the x-axis is an index, the y-axis is miles per gallon. But say we want our users to be able to change the variable to one of their choice. So we do that by creating a Quarto dashboard with Shiny components, interactive components. And so to walk through this, I do assume that you have some familiarity with Shiny. So there is the user interface, which is what a person actually sees. For example, a drop-down choices. And then the server side, which is what is manipulating the data and adding reactive variables so that whatever it is that you want to change within your dashboard actually changes. And if you are completely new to Shiny but want to learn more, please check out the Shiny website. There is a fantastic Get Started resource there that walks you through the very beginning of creating your first, excuse me, your first Shiny dashboard, and it walks through, everything that you may need in order to create dashboard with your dreams. Bye. So the first thing you may notice is within the YAML header, you have server Shiny. So this option instructs Quarto to run a Shiny server behind the document. So very important. The second thing is a context setup cell option. So what this does is indicates that this code cell should be run when the application starts, as opposed to when there's a new client session. And so the purpose of this code chunk is that you want to put any expensive initialization code, like loading data, loading your packages, things like that. That should be included within context setup. The select input is going to be a drop down in the sidebar, and it's going to show all the column options from the bars. So again, if you're new to Shiny, this comes from the Shiny select input variable. And then the different arguments say the name of this variable, what you want it to say, and then what are going to be the options within the dropdown. And then down here in this row, we're going to have a plot output, and that's what's going to show within the card. And so render plot is also from the Shiny world, and this function is going to regenerate the plot whenever the data set, the input option changes. But this is the part that's actually the powerhouse behind that change. So you have this final code chunk where the option is context server. And so within this code chunk is what you want to use to compute values or render output. And this is a very simple example. I didn't need to create a reactive data set or anything like that. But this is essentially like the server.r file whenever you create a Shiny application. So everything for your server goes in here. When we render it, we get this dashboard. So it looks very similar, but we can see it in the sidebar. We have our variable input. And so a user can go through, select the variables that they want, and then the plot changes depending on what is selected by that person. All right, so in terms of theming, so theming is how do you want your dashboard to actually look? And so Quarto includes 25 themes from the Bootstrap project. And you can use any of these themes via the theme option here underneath the dashboard. And once again, if you check the Quarto website, it will show you all the different options that you can use from Bootstrap. And rendering that, we got a dashboard that is still the same Quarto dashboard, shiny components as before, but now we'll have different color, different text, and you know, these Bootstrap themes are quite nice. And, you know, if you're doing something quick and iterative, like it's a good option for just, you know, making it not look like your standard dashboard, but like not spending too much time on customization. And I say this as someone who spends entirely too much time customizing all of my Quarto things, because you can do extensive customization of Quarto themes using SAS, and SAS is spelled S-A-S-S. And so the Bootstrap project defines over 1,400 variables, and these variables control your fonts, your colors, your paddings, basically anything. And so they can define variables that are global, like colors and fonts, and then also you can add more fine-grained tools. So for example, I created a Quarto dashboard, and I found the value boxes to be a little bit too big for my liking. And so I spent like a lot of time just making the value box exactly the height that I wanted. So there's a lot of options there. And in order to define your custom theme within your dashboard, instead of the name of the Bootstrap theme, you can put the name of your SAS file, which is the extension SCSS. And here's an example of what it might look like. So as mentioned up above, we have the defaults, which are like the big global variables. So in this case, I'm importing a Google font called Calmans. And then I'm also putting a different color for the body, a different color for the fonts across the dashboard, a different color for code, input, the navigation, changing the heading color. And then down below, add these more like fine-grained rules, like adding a text shadow for the different headings and things like that. And so rendering that, we can create a dashboard that looks, you know, exactly how you would like. And so this is a very like big example, but as you can imagine, you can really get into the weeds of like what's possible here, and make it look really, really quite nice. And then of course, once you've created your dashboard, you're going to want to share this with the world. And so there are a variety of ways of deploying dashboards created using Quarto. Something to note is for just the static HTML pages, right? You're just rendering it a single time. Like there are different considerations to take for the tool that you use for deployment, depending on what it is that you want to do. So if you want to render it a single time, another option for Quarto dashboards is scheduling your Quarto dashboard. So for example, using cron, so that the dashboard is always showing the most updated data at any time. And so if you want a scheduled dashboard, you might use a different tool than if you were just doing, you know, rendering it a single time. We didn't talk about parameters too much, but you can change parameters. And so these are variables that you can define that will show up in your dashboard when you re-render it in different ways. So a very common parameter is month. So say you want a Quarto dashboard for July and you want another one for August, you can set a month parameter. And then whenever you need to rerun your dashboard, you just change that parameter instead of having to change everything within your documents. And not specific to Quarto Dashboards, but JD Ryan has done many presentations on parameters in Quarto, and done an amazing job documenting the different ways that you can create these kind of parameterized reports. So highly recommend looking for her resources if you're interested in learning more. And then the other thing to know is with interactive Quarto dashboards, those shiny components that we talked about. So your mechanism is going to be different if you're deploying a static versus an interactive dashboard. In terms of static deployment options, some of these might sound familiar. Just announced is Posit Connect Cloud, which is actually what this dashboard, or sorry, this presentation is hosted on. And so if you haven't tried it, I recommend taking a look. It's a really great way. It authenticates through GitHub and allows you to publish R and Python content directly from GitHub. And, you know, again, very smooth process in terms of publishing this presentation. You may have heard of Quarto Pub, which is a free but public version for deploying your Quarto documents, presentations, dashboards. Posit Connect is an enterprise level option provided by Posit. It adds like a level of security and authentication and things like that, depending on what you may need. And then it also has scheduling features. Something else I want to note is there is also an option of publishing to Confluence. If, say, your company uses Confluence, you can actually deploy Quarto documents to Confluence directly. Admittedly, I'm not trying to deploy a Quarto dashboard to Confluence, but just wanted to note. And then in terms of interactive deployment options, again, in this case, you're going to need a server in order to be able to deploy these kind of documents. So you can do Connect Cloud, shinyapps.io, Hugging Face, or do your own. And then if you have like an enterprise level kind of option, you could do, say, like Posit Connect on-prem. Gonna wrap up. As I mentioned before, I think the thing I'd spend the most time on is creating these templates for dashboard layouts. And so within the GitHub repository, you can find linked in the link below. There are a few options. And so right now, like the cards are just made up of the images, but you can switch them out with your own code chunks and things like that. So that way, at least, hopefully it alleviates the need to figure out like, you know, where do I put the row? Where do I put the column and things like that? And that's it. That's all I have for today. I would love to take any questions and thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you, Isabella. We have a few questions in the chat.
Yeah.
I think I'll mute all of you so you can ask her questions directly.
I'll scroll through them. One question, is this like a regular package? So as some folks already answered, but yes, when you download RStudio, the later versions, I think as of July 2022 or so, Quarto comes packaged with RStudio. So you do not have to install it separately. But one thing to note is for updating Quarto, right? Like checking that version, making sure that you're using 1.4 or above. If you want to use a Quarto dashboard, you can go to, there are various different ways of doing it. One way is you could go to the Quarto website, download, reinstall. There's some command line options that you can have. And additionally, there is also a Quarto R package. And so the nice thing about that is if you prefer using R functions for different things, you can install the Quarto R package and work with Quarto that way. So it really depends what you need. One other tool I just want to mention is called QVM. And that one is like a Quarto version manager and particularly helpful if you need to use different versions of Quarto in your work or anything like that. Camila, I see you have a question.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, Isabella. This was great. I've tried to dip my toes in Quarto Dashboards, but it's just great to see like the overall workflow. My one question is, so you mentioned for if you're adding shiny elements to your Quarto dashboard, you have the setup chunk, like in context. But what if you're not adding shiny elements, but where do you load your libraries and your data to like use to become available in your Quarto environment?
Yeah. So you can, at least personally, the way that I do it is I create a setup chunk at the beginning of the document, and then you can use the knitr chunk options to make it so that it doesn't show. So like, for example, something like that. So that way it is run, and because, say in an EGG plot too and things like that, but it doesn't actually show up in the dashboard itself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Blanca, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you. I haven't used WebR, but I understand that it's an option to run Shiny apps. So I wonder if we can use WebR for Quarto interactive documents.
Yeah, that is a great question. I should have included WebR in here, so thank you for asking. So WebR is a tool that came out, I think, last year. And what it allows you to do is it runs Shiny without a browser, so without a server, which is amazing. And so there is actually, oops, sorry, I meant to put this. Oh, let me find the link, actually. There is a Quarto extension. So as I mentioned, there's so much about Quarto. I'm sorry that we didn't get through all of it, but one of the things that Quarto allows for is extensions. And so this just does exactly that. It extends Quarto. So if you notice in my presentation, it would go back to the agenda for every section. That is because of an extension. So I just put in the chat this Quarto WebR extension. And what that allows you to do is embed WebR code chunks within Quarto. And so it is amazing. Like, it is so cool because it means like somebody can run R on their web page without ever having to install R. And because Quarto has that consistent syntax across different kinds of outputs, you can use this WebR extension to embed these WebR chunks in Quarto dashboards if you so choose. So if you can imagine, it would say it's like 1 + 1 in a chunk, and somebody clicks run, and then the output shows up underneath. And then one more extension that I want to mention is called Shiny Live. And yes. Sorry, I'm trying to find the Quarto extension. So similarly, you can WebR was expanded on to actually include Shiny applications as well. So you can create a Shiny app that runs completely in the browser. And there's a recent video on the Posit YouTube page that kind of just shows like a really high level of Shiny Live. And it's really nice, again, because you don't need a server. You can publish it like a regular static dashboard, and you can have a Shiny app that works right there. There are some things to note. So for example, if your data is sensitive, you probably don't want to put it up on the web. And so Shiny Live is not a good option if you are using like those kind of sensitive data. So you want to go back and use a browser. There are a few other things because it is running directly on the browser. Shiny Live apps can be a little slow. And so, if you need something to be quick, but again, in that kind of spectrum of options, if you just need something like a prototype or something, using dummy data like what you saw today, you can use Shiny Live. So anyway, a very long answer to say yes, with Quarto Dashboards, you can also use WebR and Shiny Live, and you can do it through those extensions that are linked. Gregors, I see you have a question.
Yeah, hi, this is really great. Thanks so much. The one question is, and I put it in the chat too. So if I'm using a service like Netlify or whatever to just host a basic Quarto blog, changing the YAML to dashboard, we can take advantage of the dashboard features and publish it just the same, just title as index, and push it and deploy it, and it works just the same.
So you should be able to deploy to Netlify. The question is like changing, if say you have a blog to dashboard, because dashboards use that that heading like row and column layout. I don't know what your dashboard will look like, but yeah. But it like, say like you have a presentation or something like that, like I think like, yes, so you should be able to just switch out format to whatever it is that you want to show.
Right, because it's essentially rendering as an HTML page. So theoretically, it's just taking advantage of the abilities to do rows and columns and cards and things like that is more what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, perfect.
Just going through some of the questions.
Yeah, thank you. I think these dashboards are very useful. And as I said, I've tried switching within HTML and dashboards. Yeah, some functionalities, some features are appearing fine. Others are not still available for HTML, and they are only available on dashboards. And so, but it's nice to, for example, the cards. We can add the cards. Yeah, that is so the post looks very nice. And there are a nice so lots of features that are very useful. There was interesting question about what would you suggest in favor of using Quarto instead of R Markdown. What are the features that basically are better within a Quarto document than using R Markdown?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, one thing to note is R Markdown is not going away. If you have used R Markdown extensively in your work, you can continue doing so. There's no need to transfer things over. But that being said, in terms of new features and feature sets and things like that, the development work is going into Quarto. And so if you want to stay on top of like the latest and greatest, for example, using WebR and Shiny Live in Quarto documents, then you might want to consider at least adopting Quarto into your workflow. I think another thing is, I touched on it very briefly at the beginning, but one thing is if you are a Python user, for example, and you want to be able to create these kind of documents, Quarto is inherently multilingual. So if you are a Python user and you want to use R Markdown, if you've ever done that before, you have to install a package called Reticulate, and essentially you have to also have R. So you have to install R, install a Reticulate to use Python, versus Quarto, which doesn't need that. Like Quarto doesn't need any programming languages at all, but it's also like natively built to handle R or Python, like independent of each other. And another thing to note is that shared feature set. And so it depends on the variable, but that SAS style sheet that I showed you, if the variables match, you can use the same style sheet for a presentation, for a website, for a dashboard. I will say there are some variables that are like more specific, like a navigation bar might not apply to a presentation or something like that. But because they use that same kind of theming structure, like it just makes it easier, like if you want everything to kind of look the same. And then another thing is, if you've used our Markdown, you may recall like there's a very big ecosystem of packages. So Sharingan for creating slides, Bookdown for creating books. And each one of them have like their own specific way of doing things. Like I'm picking on tab sets because that's one I remember. Versus Quarto, where you create a tab set in a presentation or you create it in a blog, it's the same syntax. And so it just makes it a little bit easier and more consistent. But all that being said, it really depends on your needs and what you're using these for. And as Frederica mentioned, Quarto is still relatively new. I think not even 2 years old since it's been released or announced. And so, you know, if there is a feature that exists in our Markdown and doesn't exist in Quarto, I mean, I'm sure the developers would love to hear about it. You put it as an issue on the web on the GitHub repo. But in any case, it's really up to you and what you need.
Okay. So God bless you, Isabella. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I see a couple more questions. I think, let's see, you asked about deployment based on schedule or parameters, and some folks shared some topics and some resources on that topic. There is a parameter section on the Quarto dashboard documentation. So sorry, like now I'm like, oh, I should have added that in. So please take a look there. As I mentioned, JD Ryan has done a lot of great work creating resources for parameters in Quarto documents and reports, if you want to check those out. I recently gave a talk on refreshing Quarto dashboards on a schedule using Posit Connect, but again, Posit Connect is an enterprise level community thing. And I will take notes and I'll put them in the README for this GitHub repository so I don't forget. And yes, as Peter mentioned, Our Medicine has some really great Quarto presentations. I didn't know they had one on cron scheduling, but I'm definitely going to go watch that.
Thank you very much. So we look forward to our next event with Bruno Rodriguez while we say goodbye to Isabella. That this event today has been amazing. Thank you very much. So we learned lots of things and we are going to get into practice soon.
Yeah, please try it out. I'd love to see the dashboards everybody makes. Somebody has the link to the dashboard templates. I just put that in. Right now there's only 3, but if there are like other templates you're interested in, please let me know. I would love to like build that out to have like a really good, robust selection of templates so that people can focus on, you know, creating their plots as opposed to formatting their dashboard. I think, Matt, you mentioned, where do you consult options for YAML headers? So again, the Quarto documentation has those. And one other thing to note is, another difference between Quarto and our Markdown, Quarto has something called YAML intelligence. So when you start writing something in a YAML heading and you press tab, if there are valid options, it should show you a list of what is available. And so, and that really helps when you're like filling out the YAML heading. And Matt, you also mentioned using themes like our Markdown, not using CSS files. There's those bootstrap options, but if there's a specific theme that you're thinking about, then just please reach out. And yeah, I really appreciate everybody's time. Betsy, you asked, when are there shiny elements that cannot be supported in Quarto with shiny elements? It's necessary to move to shiny dashboard. So that is a great question. I don't have like a very specific like case in which I would be like, oh no, this no longer works for Quarto dashboards, I would just like, I would just check out to see if there's a point in which like a Quarto dashboard cannot handle like the computations that you're asking of it. But that's a really great question. I think I will ask my team because it's a really good one. Matt, you asked, how should Python be configured to run from Quarto through RStudio? And so similarly to R Markdown, so anything you run in R Markdown, you can run in Quarto. If you did -- bracket Python and then put Python code, it will run the Python code. But one difference is, again, R Markdown requires R and Reticulate to run that Python code. Quarto does not. And so we didn't, if you watch the intro to Quarto webinar, I go into this a bit more, but in the YAML heading, you can specify which engine to use. And so Quarto uses knitr, same as R Markdown for R, and it uses Jupyter for Python. And so if you put engine Jupyter in your YAML heading, it will know, oh, I should be using Python for these. Alternatively, I believe Quarto looks at the first code chunk and is like, that's the engine I should use. So if you have a Python chunk, it will know to use it will know to use Python instead. However, again, RStudio is based on R, right? And so generally when people are writing Quarto documents with Python computation, they try other IDEs. So I generally use VS Code. Positron was just announced, and so that allows you to, that's a code editor built for data science that is, again, inherently multilingual. And so you don't have to have Reticulate like RStudio does. But if you really want to, you absolutely can. Camilla asked, oh, can you speak briefly about Positron? Oh, that was my very quick intro. Positron just came out. It is a new IDE for data science. It's built to be multilingual, so like and primarily focusing on R and Python for now. It is a fork of VS Code, so if you open it up, it will look very familiar if you used VS Code before. You can install extensions and things like that, but it has a lot of great features for people who do regularly work with data. So things like a data viewer, plot viewer. So versus VS Code, just pure VS Code, where you kind of have to configure the environment to be exactly what it is that you want it to be. VS Code, comes with this opinionated thought of like, oh, this is what data scientists need to be able to do their job. And so it is up on GitHub right now. If you haven't used it, like, please give it a try. The developers are very, very interested in hearing feedback and making it a wonderful experience for data scientists. And so they would love to hear from you. When are we getting a Quarto cookbook soon? Or we'll link to it, but soon. Blanca mentioned we cannot use confidential data when using the WebArt and Shiny Live extensions. You definitely shouldn't. Let me find the video. Because everything is just being passed over the internet. And so, if there's something you don't want out there, probably not the option, but it is pretty great if it is, again, like small data that you need for like just education purposes or things like that. And here it is. Shiny Live video where Barrett kind of goes into that kind of security sort of question. Yeah, I hope I got everybody's questions. If not, just let me know. But thank you so much. Thank you, Our Ladies Row. and I really appreciate the time to chat with you about Quarto Dashboards. Please give them a try, and I'd love to see what you create.